We're going to basically start by talking about your students' academic career, their path through Willamette, by talking about different components of a Willamette education. And then we're going to move to a sort of a Q&A session amongst ourselves, raising the questions that we thought your students would like to know the answers to, related to how they might succeed and thrive while they're here at Willamette. So in order to get us started on a discussion of the pathways your students are going to follow when they're here at Willamette, I'm going to show one slide, and it's just going to give you an outline of the progress that your student will make while they're here. So I'll ask that you read from the bottom up, thinking I designed it in such a way, and I should say that I designed it. This is not obviously the most slick thing ever, but reading it from the bottom up and thinking about these are the different stages that your students will move through. Some of you attended the first year experience session that was held a couple of weeks ago, so you're already familiar with the college colloquium, which is part of the first year experience. Then we'll talk about general education and thinking about breadth and exploration before moving on to a discussion of the major and its purpose within the curriculum. We'll speak a little bit about additional elements, the ways in which your student might choose to supplement or complement their own education, and finally conclude by talking about the capstone experience, sort of the penultimate and culminating experience before your student graduates with a degree, or in some cases, perhaps degrees. The way this worked out in terms of the way that it looks on the screen for you here, you might think perhaps of a flower growing up, but I'm someone who focuses on East Asia in my own research. And so to me, it actually looks like a Buddhist stupa. And I thought, well, that could be appropriate, sort of cultivating a sense of humility. Of course, the more we know, the more that we know we need to know. So we're going to get started today by asking Professor Cotlar to first speak a little bit about the college colloquium. So, Seth.
Sure. College colloquium is kind of like a student's home, their first home at Willamette. It starts meeting the first or second day you show up on campus. It meets every day during orientation. And so the college colloquium course will have met 3 or 4 times before freshmen start their first other classes. And so what it does is it creates this space for students to get to know each other in the classroom, get to know a professor well. The professor of that colloquium serves as those students' advisor for their first 2 years at Willamette. And because they're teaching those students in those classes, they get to know them well, they know their strengths, they know what they need to work on, they know their interests. And so it makes us better advisors for students in the sense that we know them kind of as whole people. And you've probably seen the topics. Have we listed the topics yet? Are those, yeah, they're out there. Okay. I'm not teaching next year, so I'm not teaching the colloquium next year, so I didn't know whether that was done yet. But there's a wide range of really fantastic classes. Professors get a lot of creativity and freedom to design kind of their dream class. And so I really urge students to take something that most interests them. Don't necessarily take something that's connected to what their major might be or so on, even though probably their major is connected to what they're interested in. But just take something that looks cool to you. And part of that is a shtick that I always give with my first year students, which is to remind them that college isn't 13th grade. That college is a different thing. And it's a kind of transition into a much more independent mode of learning, where you pursue your interests and your passions. You're not doing what other people have decided you need to do, but instead you get a chance to really pursue what's of interest to you. So take advantage of that. And in those classes, the idea is that students get hands-on experience doing what they need to do to succeed at Willamette, which is participate in class conversations, learn how to write effectively, and develop just the good habits, the sort of study habits, et cetera, necessary to succeed in college.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Seth. Yeah, your students will soon learn that there's kind of, sometimes we call it the Willamette way, but Willamette students are engaged and they grapple with ideas, and they're actually talented. I want to conversationalist is the wrong word, but they're really just so good at engaging with each other and learning to make their points fluently and pointedly. And they don't shy away from hard conversations, and they kind of learn how to do that in a respectful way without impeding critical learning or critical thought or anything like that. I'm going to pick up the next piece, which is something that certainly many of your students are going to be doing in their first year, which is pursuing their general education requirements. And the college, we think of it, I think, in terms of both breadth, but also in terms of areas of focus. So certainly we want students to be exposed to a variety of different disciplinary perspectives. And one way to think about that is each field offers a different way of looking at the world and solving the problems of the world. So each discipline gives students a particular set of tools. And we generally classify those as arts and humanities, social science, natural science, and mathematical science. And so we ask students to take courses in all of these fields to get exposure to these different ways of doing, different ways of thinking, different ways of engaging the world. At the same time, we hope that students are discovering new areas of interest as they progress and proceed. You sort of never quite know what's going to pique your interest. And Seth mentioned that we serve as advisors in our college colloquium courses, and it's always such a great joy to me when I have a student who I've met through the college colloquium process. They're not necessarily a major in my department, and they discover something outside of their chosen field that they love. So a student interested in exercise and health science who's going to pursue that major, and that's fantastic, but then takes a creative writing class that just opens a door, and the student pursues that interest as well. And so that's part of the spirit of the breadth requirements. And then we'll also ask your students to prepare themselves for engaging the world. We have something called the world engagement requirement, which requires a degree of study of a non-English language, and then also taking courses that expose them to different cultural pathways. So basically equipping them with cultural competency. And we also have a requirement on power, difference, and equity that asks students to think critically about the ways in which power is configured in the world and the impact that that has on social relations and human behavior. And all of this is designed essentially to create breadth and expression. So at this point, I'd actually like to turn to my colleagues here briefly. We talked about this a little bit when we were discussing this section, but I wanted to ask each and every one of them which class they would recommend that is not in their home department, just to speak to that spirit of exploration. So let's see, James, can we start with you? What would you recommend?
Sure. I often tell my students this exact same thing, and I did this myself, both as an undergrad and as a grad student, to take courses in studio art, whether or not you're an artist. They're often hard to get into because, the space is limited, but if you can get a spot in one, it's an amazing experience. For me, as a creator of music, it's a great outlet to make something that I'm not as invested in, so then the critical feedback I get doesn't feel as personal, and still pertains to what I do as a musician. So I dive into the studio art curriculum: sculpture, printmaking, photography, whatever you can get.
Fantastic, thank you. Alison, how about you? What course would you recommend?
So I am a chemistry professor, but I have had the great opportunity to take two different classes during my time at Willamette, and I would highly recommend both of them. One was Fundamentals of Costume Design in the theater department, and that was absolutely fantastic. I was by far the weakest student in the class, but I had a blast analyzing texts and creating costumes for characters in different plays. And discovering that I can actually draw. I didn't realize that I could actually sketch, so that was super fun. And I also last spring took Ballet 1. I am not a dancer. I have never taken ballet in my life, and that was really fun to pull myself out of my comfort zone and put on a leotard twice a week and stand around with a bunch of Willamette students who were, again, way better than I was, but that was really fun. So ballet 1 and fundamentals of costume design, highly recommend.
Thank you. Daniel, how about you?
So, this past summer, I actually had an opportunity to kind of go around like every classroom on campus, and I'm sort of going to second what James said a little bit. Like some of the art studios are really, really cool. In particular, I really think that the sculpture studio opens up like a lot of possibilities to do some wacky stuff that you would not do in any other major. And then also the photography studio. So Alexandra Opie's experimental photography class looks really cool. You actually work in a wet lab and develop film and learn, how all that stuff works. And I asked her, like, do people really sign up for this in 2020? Like, are students really interested in like film? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. Every single semester that I teach it, it's completely full, and the students have a blast. So I think those two would be pretty cool. And I am going to take a class next semester in the math department, which is sort of physics adjacent. So maybe it's not surprising, but it's on topological data analysis, which is maybe like an upper division class on sort of this new exciting area on how the types of math that you use to study networks and stuff that is really kind of really big in data science and those kinds of fields. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Danielle. And Seth, how about you?
So since everybody's saying multiple classes, I'm going to say more than one too. The first, I would say, take the history of jazz with James Miley, who's here with us today. And I've not taken that class. I sat in on it. I've sat in on it a couple times. But when I was an undergraduate, a friend of mine, I was looking for a class my senior year, and they said, "Oh, take this history of jazz class. It's cool." And I was like, "Okay, whatever." And it like totally changed my life. Like I became a fan of jazz, and for the last 30 years of my life, I enjoy listening to jazz. And I would have never done that. It just wasn't part of my family or anything else. And it's been a class that I almost every day I'm thankful for that person who told me to take it, because it really enriched my life and my understanding of American history and so on. And the second class I would suggest is a class that meets at the state prison that's taught by Professor Melissa Buse-Michaud. And it's a great class about restorative justice, in which students meet with inmates at the prison in the class as equals, as peers. And it's been really transformative for some of the students who I know who have taken the class. And it's also a way in which, and this is something that Willamette tries to do a lot, which is to kind of break the bubble around campus and get students out into the community. And working in a capacity that feels different than in a classroom setting, but is kind of out in the real world, if you will, grappling with problems in the real world. And so I would really highly recommend that class too.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'll go last. I'm also trained as a historian, and as I mentioned earlier, I focus on East Asia. So I've always been very interested in Asian languages and international studies and history. But recently I've gotten increasingly interested in and begun to offer classes in environmental history. And so I would love to take the Intro to Earth Science class. I have no background knowledge in that, but that to me would be a dream. And I think some of your students are in that class. So I'm envious of them. I will give a plug. There are still seats in Jazz in America taught by Professor Miley. So it's not too late to change. I'm just saying that if your students want to switch into that, there are still some seats available.
I hear it's pretty good.
I hear it's amazing.
No pressure, James, but don't make me look bad, okay?
So James, we're actually going to shift to you to talk a little bit about, what does it mean to be in a major, and what kinds of skills do students develop in the major?
Okay, I was thinking about this, and I figured the best way to talk about this was part story. I'm going to tell you a very short version of my own story. I went to Occidental College, which is a very similar school to Willamette. And then to just strip all the numbers out and just sort of go with what it kind of looks like for a student. So in terms of majors, the way that the programs are structured here is you can kind of think of it as the major is about a third Gen Ed is more or less a third, and then there's this other third left of your coursework while you're here. That could be another major. So there are a lot of students that are doing double majors because there's room to do that. It could be all kinds of different things that are, loosely connected to what you're studying in your primary area. It could be just a couple of different minors. There's a lot of flexibility there. And one of the things I really love about that is that there's no lack of rigor within the programs, but there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can navigate different programs on campus. And most departments are set up to offer majors that work well with other majors. So if one of my best early students here was a jazz vibraphonist who started as a chemistry major and ended up a music major. I think he got a chemistry minor. Did you know Paxton, Alison, by any chance? Okay, Paxton Galing, he was a vibraphone player. He's now a doctor. He went off and then did more classes and went off to med school. But one of the things I wanted to point out about, I taught for a number of years at really large research universities. I taught at Fresno State, I taught at Virginia Tech, and when I had the chance to come to Willamette, kind of mid-career for me, I jumped at it because I was remembering what it was like for me as a student in that liberal arts environment. And what I did as an undergraduate is I went to school, and it was 1985, my first year of college, and I was convinced, even though I had been playing music, that of course I would not major in music because I have an older brother who does that. So don't do that. He's doing that. I started with the intent of being a biology math double major. I was in the honors calculus sequence. I was signed up for the intro biology sequence. I wanted to do oceanography, live on a boat, study squishy things. I was set. And I got to school, and my first quarter, for Gen Ed, to satisfy Gen Ed, I took a music theory class because I figured I kind of knew that stuff and it would be fun. So I took my music theory class for fun. And by the end of my first year at Occidental College, I had become a music and English double major from my math biology original intent. I wasn't behind in anything. And that's one of the things I think is really important to point out, is that there's room for exploration and there's room to kind of find that thing that really speaks to you as a student. And we have music majors that start mid-stream second year and are still able to make it work. So there's great flexibility. And then we have this amazing faculty that is doing all of this world-class research and creative work that you get to work with, sometimes one-on-one in these departments. So it's a really vibrant and exciting environment to study anything that we offer. And I am a doctor, so my parents, yeah, you did it. So my doctorate is in music, but it works great, and I'm super happy to be here.
Fantastic. And that's a very nice segue, Danielle, to ask you to speak a little bit about some of those experiences that students can have. As you can see, Daniel is in the lab, and he's working with students doing guided research this summer. So let me hand that piece of it over to you, please, Danielle.
Sure. So so just to follow up on what James said, one thing so I went to large state schools for both my undergraduate and my PhD. And interestingly, one of my colleagues in the physics department, his daughter just got into Georgia Tech, where I got my PhD. And it's so different because students there basically have to declare their major before they even show up on campus. And then they're only allowed to change once, but they have to ask for special dispensation or whatever. And it's just really kind of different from when I think about when I'm advising students and they come in, they're freaking out because like, oh my God, I haven't declared my major yet. And it's like, no, don't worry about it. Take some classes, go take a class with Seth, go take a class with Alison, go take a music class with James, then figure it out. And then they find something that they like. And then maybe halfway through, they're like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. I need to change majors. And it's like, you can still do that. So it's nice that the majors are set up in such a way that if you really want to focus on chemistry or physics or history or whatever, you can do that. But if you want to switch majors or so forth, there's that flexibility. But yeah, getting back to the question that you asked, Cecily. So while there's obviously a lot to be learned from discrete sort of coursework, and if you're in physics doing problem sets, and there's definitely a lot that you can learn from courses. I think that a lot of the real growth that you can get as a student at Willamette comes from some of these things that are more hands-on and kind of outside of rigorous readings and problem sets and so forth. And so if you've been paying attention to the background, there's a couple of students, Jeremy and Teddy, who are working with me this summer on research. They are participating in something called the Science Collaborative Research Program here at Willamette. And so Jeremy is going to be a senior, Teddy's going to be a sophomore, and they're basically getting paid to work in my lab over the summer for 10 weeks full time. And so you can see it's kind of a disaster area in here, but have a lot of good equipment, and we're doing some sort of academic research level work, not just little toy projects. I think that there's a lot of opportunities like that on campus. So for example, a lot of the theater productions, all the theater productions are essentially put together by faculty and students, and there's a lot of opportunities for students to work on those, and they're big elaborate productions. A lot of our students have a lot of sort of interesting extracurriculars. So Jeremy and Teddy both have played in the wind ensembles. They have also both participated in athletics. So Teddy was a swimmer, and Jeremy does cross country. So there's lots of opportunities for students to really kind of engage with other aspects of life, which I think is very important, because I think that establishing sort of balance and becoming a full, well-rounded individual is sort of very central to a Willamette education.
Excellent, thank you.
I guess
so
I should have brought up too. Sorry, Cecily. Another place where I've seen students sort of grow a lot is by studying abroad. Obviously, it has been kind of an issue in the last year, but before that, a large fraction of our students do study abroad in all kinds of places and participate in really varied and interesting programs. Some of them which are related to majors, some of them which are completely unrelated to majors, some of them which are for practicing foreign languages. And then the other really cool opportunity that we have here on campus is, I don't know if people have heard about this, but we have a sister campus, Tokyo International University of America, which is a satellite campus of a university in Japan called Tokyo International University. And pre-COVID, every year they bring about 100 students, mostly from East Asia, from their campus to our campus. And then Willamette students can basically interact with those students, help serve as sort of hosts, and so forth, and really get to meet people from these sort of pretty different cultures. So that's another really great opportunity. Okay, so now I'm
No, thank you for bringing it. I was gonna sneak in the study abroad if you had mentioned it. So yeah, and I just happened to be talking with the director of our Office of International Education program today, and we were talking about how slowly but surely that's getting back on track, and so we're all really excited about that, both in terms of welcoming the students who are coming from TIU, but also in the opportunities for your students to study abroad as well. So the very last piece that we'll talk about today is the capstone, sort of the part of the Willamette curriculum where students are asked to bring everything together. And so Alison, could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the senior capstone is something that students do in every single major. It's a requirement of every major at Willamette. And it's really an opportunity for students to apply and integrate the knowledge and skills that they've learned in that curriculum. And the topics vary, and how it functions varies from major to major. Sometimes it's one semester, sometimes it's 2 semesters of research. But really, students are applying those that knowledge and skills to an independent research project. And in some disciplines, it's entirely, it's a discrete project by that student, entirely student-led. In other disciplines, sort of students participate in a project that's building over several years in a particular research lab. Sometimes students go out and do field work at, in the community. For example, in anthropology, students often will work on site with local nonprofits, trying to really answer a question of their own design. And all of the capstones are really mentored sort of one-on-one. So every student is working one-on-one with a faculty member. And I just wanted to share a story about one that I thought was really exciting. A student who graduated this spring, she was actually a double major in chemistry and studio art, and really wanted to find a way to integrate the two. She ended up getting a very prestigious presidential scholarship for her senior year, where she was able to work on a sort of integrated project. In the chemistry side, she was studying specific, oh, am I frozen? Am I frozen? No. She was studying specific DNA structures that can be used to detect microRNAs, which are sort of indicators of different kinds of cancer. And so in the lab, she was using fluorescence spectroscopy to understand their thermal properties, the thermal properties of these DNAs. And then over in studio art, she was exploring these structures by creating sculptures, 3D sculptures out of metal and glass and paper, and was able to integrate it all together, which I thought really what really exemplifies what we do here at Willamette at a liberal arts institution. But I think that's all I am going to say about capstones for now.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Alison. So hopefully we've given you a picture, certainly one of flexibility and exploration, but also one where definitely we're seeing students progress year after year as they develop their interests. And so I always tend to think of a liberal arts education as possessing both breadth and depth, that they're really beginning to refine their skills, apply them, put them into practice, and then create, right? Come up with a project of your own design and put it into action. And it's always just such a pleasure to watch your students moving through that process. You know, Seth started us off by talking about college colloquium, and I think I can speak for everyone here. When it's been 4 years after you worked with a college colloquium class and you see them on the stage at commencement, we're always like, that one was mine, even though they're really yours. But we really do. We're so pleased to watch them grow in this way. We're going to switch over now to the second part of the program, which is talking about just the questions that we came up with in terms of thinking about things that we would like your students to know, and you as well. But in the meantime, as we're exploring these questions, I certainly want to invite you, if you have questions of your own, perhaps about specific programs, for example, please don't hesitate to add them to the Q&A box there on your screen, because we are saving time at the end to address any questions you might have. So the questions, I'll sort of take them in turn and go to each person, but the first question is for Professor Cotlar. How does a student flourish at Willamette? What advice do you have for those students?
All right, I have a couple of pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is to trust your own curiosity and your own interests. That oftentimes, this is partially autobiographical. I went to college and I thought I was going to be an econ major or a politics major or a Russian major or a math major. But I really liked history, but I thought that like I couldn't really get a history degree because what would you do, like open up a history store? And then I took some history classes, and finally I just realized, like, look, this is what I like, this is what I'm interested in, and I should just pursue it. You know, a liberal arts degree is not, it's not a pre-professional degree. I mean, the point of a liberal arts college is to develop the skills that will enable you to succeed in a wide range of fields. Our former history majors are doing like an unbelievably large range of things in the world. None of them have opened up a history store yet. We're still figuring out how to make that work. But anyway, the point is that at Willamette, it's like a smorgasbord of things for you to discover. And oftentimes people don't know yet what it is they're passionate about and what they're really good at and what they're really interested in. And so this is a place to trust that and to pursue that. And the other piece I would say is a lot of it is about relationships, both your relationships with faculty members, and to know that faculty members, the reason why we teach at a place like Willamette is because we enjoy working with students and we don't experience students as a burden. We experience that as like, that's what gives meaning to our vocational lives. And so don't be afraid of your professors, don't be intimidated by them, and seek them out. And likewise with your fellow students, you're surrounded by just a really incredible group of other young people who have skills and interests, etc. And one thing that's been really pleasurable to me is to see students who I've had in a class freshman year, and then they'll take a class together with me in their senior year. And it's clear that like the relationship that they formed with each other in that class as freshmen just really was really meaningful to them. And they came to sort of be writing partners for each other. Like they would read drafts of each other's papers and so on. And that kind of relationship is really invaluable. Finding other people who you just click with intellectually and so on. And so Willamette is filled with people to kind of make those relationships. And then the last piece I would say, and this is very pragmatic and nuts and bolts, is to just like figure out what you need to do to keep up with the work and don't fall behind, because it's really hard to catch up if you fall behind. And I think faculty members are pretty reasonable, I think, about like not assigning an outrageous amount of work, but it's a full-time job. I mean, there's a lot of work outside of the classroom. It's different from high school in that way. And so students need to be prepared for that and to have a plan as to when and how they're going to get that work done. And the students who I feel like best flourish at Willamette are the ones who are able to kind of manage their time in such a way and find a way to really just keep up with that daily sort of grind of the work. So that's my pep talk.
Thank you, Seth. And that's a really nice segue to the next question, which is for Alison, which is, well, how do I persevere? How do I make the best of maybe a challenging situation? Yeah. Alison.
Well, I know a lot about this because I teach chemistry, which sometimes folks find challenging, but really I think a lot of students flourish in as well. So I would say the first thing really is to get connected. So Willamette is an extremely collaborative and supportive place. It is not competitive. We don't grade on curves where one student excels at and another student, is not able to because of that. And so really get connected. We encourage study groups. Our departments are built around this hearth system where there is an actual space where students can come together and study and work together in study groups. The chemistry hearth is kind of famous on campus. It is a space that is adjacent to computer labs. There's a little kitchenette, couch, chairs, dogs, and faculty offices line this space. So students come together and they work on problem sets, and then they can access a faculty member if they have a question. And our doors are almost always open. They're usually open to help students who are there working. So I would say get connected, form study groups, use your peers in a very supportive way. Reach out to professors. Again, we are not scary individuals. We are here teaching because that's what we love to do. I actually do, especially during COVID, give out my cell phone number to students, and they don't hesitate to text at 11:30 at night sometimes, and that's actually okay. I turn off the sound. But we are here because we really want to help students. I would say go to faculty office hours, go to study sessions. There are a lot of planned study sessions. We have, particularly in some of our intro chemistry and physics and math classes, we have embedded tutors. Students who have been successful in that class before go back and retake the class so that they can support students and hold study sessions outside of class. Go to those. They are really fabulous and they are free to students. And there's also free one-on-one tutoring through our Office of Academic Support. So use all of those resources. And then finally, we do have something called a care reporting system where if we as faculty members notice that a student is struggling, we can reach out and we can say like, hey, we've noticed something's wrong. Come talk to us, talk to your advisor. We want to help. And so really we watch out for that. And if there are indicators that a student isn't going to be successful, we can nip it in the bud early. So yeah, I think those are some of my tips for persevering, particularly in challenging majors or just in general. Yeah.
So I have a couple of comments, Alison, that maybe I'd add. So this is maybe a little bit more utilitarian, but one thing to like keep in mind is that like you don't need to get 100% on everything, and just organize yourself so you can do okay, and it will be okay, right? But if you set yourself up where everything has to be absolutely perfect, it's going to take forever. and it's not going to be perfect. And then you're just going to be stressed out and burnt out, and like getting, an 85 is fine. So I think that's important to realize at some point, because otherwise a lot of students that really get stuck in the perfectionism trap, and that can be problematic. Like, sure, maybe you can get all A's, but if you get 1B, that's not the end of the world. And then the other thing is that you should just really make sure you turn things in. So if you think about it, if you said you had assignments that were equally weighted, right, and you didn't turn one in and you got a 0, and then you got 100 on the next one, you average that, that's still a 50, which is an F. You got another 100 on the next one, that's 200 points over by 3 assignments, that's a 66, that's a D. Then you turn in another one, that's 300 points out of 400 points, that gives you a 75%, so you're at a C. That 1 0 costs you like 3 100s to bring up to a C. On the other hand, if you turned in something and it was kind of like half-baked, like, not that I'm encouraging this particularly, like try to get things done, but if you can't, and you got a 50 on it, and then you take that 50 and that 100, you average it, that's a C already, that's 75%, right? So like really be strategic about, how you're doing your coursework, because at the end of the day, you also need to have a life outside of academics. And that's where you're really gonna get a lot of really important things. And except for very few things, nobody's really gonna like care whether your GPA was like a 4.0 or a 3.95 or a 3.8, like ever, unless you applied to be a college professor, and then weirdly here they asked me for my undergraduate transcript. That was about it. So anyway.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the next question is actually one I wanted to ask myself, which is just how do we encourage students to grow? But in many ways, you're already getting a sense of there are certain themes in these conversations that I think that what you can definitely sense is the undercurrent is we believe in your students. We know that they are capable of amazing things and amazing transformation and amazing growth. And we're here to support that. Just to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Alison and Daniel are saying, I regularly say to my students, if you could do this perfectly, you wouldn't need to be here, right? You're here to learn. You're here to try something you haven't done before. You're here to grow. And that's really sort of the growth piece of it, is to say that it's, go ahead and challenge yourself, whether it means that you're going to explore something that, you're committed to a certain track, and you say, perhaps unlike James, that you stuck on the math and biology double major, and but go, take that music class anyways, and just create new pathways in your brain, basically, and try out new things. We want, again, I'm kind of echoing themes of our conversation before, particularly what Seth was saying, but we want to train your students to be able to do anything or to do everything. That yes, we train wonderful chemists and astounding musicians and thoughtful historians, but we're also training, the people who are really going to make a difference in the world and who are really going to help to tackle some of these very, as they say, wicked problems that face us as a globe. And so in order to have the ingenuity and creativity, we want your students to really be almost testing the limits of their potential. And that does mean stepping outside of your comfort zone a little bit, trying something new, and also recognizing that you have the freedom to suggest and to innovate. And that cycles back to things like internships or guided research. There are some programs, Alison has referenced one on campus, they're grants for student projects that students propose the project. And it's very competitive, but at least a dozen students get funded every year for proposing something to execute a project over the summer from start to finish. And so those opportunities await your students as well. And so really just to keep encouraging them to seize opportunities, and also to go ahead and take a little bit of a risk. Because I think, as you can sense from this group here, like, we're here to help. We're not here to weed you out. We're here to make sure that you really do realize your potential in the fullest way. Here, we're going to shift a little bit and think about perhaps a more focused look at that future potential by asking the question of, okay, but I know what I want to do. So how do I best prepare for it at Willamette? How do I prepare for my future? And Daniel, we're going to kick that one over to you.
So I guess my advice would be to have a plan. And I really say more like have a plan A, right? It's what you're working on right now. This is what you think you want to do. But then also have a plan B and maybe a plan C, right? But then having a plan isn't just like, oh, I'm going to major in chemistry. It's like, okay, I'm going to major in chemistry and, right? Like, what's the next step? And always kind of think about what the next steps could be. And one cool thing that we have on campus is we have resources to do that, right? You can talk to your professors about like, oh, well, like I'm interested in this. And they might be like, oh yeah, this person graduated like 3 years ago and they're doing this, or graduated 15 years ago and they're like the head of the National Society for whatever, and like are super successful in this particular field, right? But then there's also a lot of resources on campus that are not related to professors and to academics, right? So one of my favorites is the Career Services Office. Mandy and her team, Mandy Deborah is the director of Career Services, and her team are just amazing. And so I encourage students a lot to go and see her and her team early and often, right? Because if you show up like 2 months before graduation, you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, like, that's a little bit too late, right? At that point, you're basically going to graduate with no plan, and you're going to have to figure it out on your own. Whereas if you start kicking in, and Mandy has all these seminars that she does where she says, okay, like let's just spitball here. What do you want to do? Okay, what are things that you like? And they can match you up with different career paths that like are associated with your interests. And then you can start exploring what those look like, right? Like what the heck does a systems engineer do as compared to like a mechanical engineer, as opposed to like material scientists or whatever, and like how are these careers different, right? Or for example, what does a patent lawyer do? Do most students that come into college know what a patent lawyer does? Absolutely not, right? But these are things that you need to sort of figure out so that you can then tailor your own Willamette experience to sort of get there. On the flip side, a lot of our faculty are concerned with not just the ideal liberal arts education where you just explore things. We are concerned about giving you opportunities and helping you develop skills that will be marketable in the workplace, right? So for example, the chemistry labs have sort of top of the line equipment, and students learn how to use all this analytical equipment that I think the NMR machine costs like $500,000, right? Like that's not something that they usually let you play around with at a lot of schools. Here in my lab, we have, I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of hard to see. In front of Teddy there's a camera. That camera is like $40,000. Can take video at like 100,000 frames per second or something. So we do try to sort of think about like what are things that we can teach students that aren't just textbook knowledge that they can help them in their careers. So as an example, in the physics department, for example, I think all but one of our classes now has a computational physics component to it. So as a physics major, you graduate with basically 4 years of programming experience. And now there's also all these new minors. So we have the business minor and data science minor, which are a lot more sort of career focused. And so students that are interested in those paths can follow those if they want. Okay, I think since we're running out of time, I'll stop there, but yeah.
Great, thanks so much, Danielle. That's super helpful. So we've now given you sort of a pretty broad range of things, right? So it's okay, do your work on time, but you should also take classes that are challenging for you. And oh, by the way, make time to speak to your professors and get to know them. And don't forget to do homework together with your peers in the hearth spaces. And there's also study abroad and research, and there's some internships. And we haven't even talked about the fact that many of your students are athletes. Many of your students are performers and maybe involved in theater or music ensembles and the like. And then also, usually they want to eat and sleep. And maybe hang out with their friends at the same time. So culminating question for Professor Miley. James, how do you balance all of this? How do you make it work?
Well, I'll circle back to something that Seth and actually Alison touched on this too. Time management and perseverance. There's I hear this a lot from students that are entering college, that they're a little nervous about continuing some of the things that they've done in high school as far as music or theater or participating in athletics, either organized sport or intramurals. thinking that they're not going to have the time to do it, that the classes and the expectations outside those classes are going to be too much. And so those things that might be considered extracurricular are not going to be viable. And what inevitably happens is students that are heavily involved in music in high school or in theater or in athletics who don't continue that in college there's like a void there for them that doesn't feel right. And it makes it harder to do the things that you now suddenly have more time to do. So within reason, of course, you wouldn't come in as a brand new college student and sign up for every single music ensemble and spend 38 hours a week only doing rehearsal. But to continue that connection to music or whatever, theater or athletics, gives a lot of incoming students a really good both sense of focus in kind of daily life, and also a good framework around which they can organize things. I know a lot of students who use their ensemble time and their practice time as a way to help schedule everything else that they're doing, because they're used to, I need to spend this amount of time a day on my saxophone. So now I'm going to spend this extra time on these other classes. It's like it's already built in. And so continuing that music connection feeds the academic focus as well. So it does, though, come down to that idea of time management and really making sure that you stay on top of everything, and really communicating with your faculty members that are teaching the classes that you're taking. I'm always, as an ensemble director, I direct the jazz band, and out of 18 students in any given year, I would say 15 on average are not music majors. So they're coming from all over the campus, and I'm always interested in hearing what they're up to and then making sure that I make room for that as well. So a good example kind of how I think all of these activities on campus are structured is we took the jazz ensemble a few years ago to the Reno Jazz Festival, and it was end of April, which was the last weekend of our classes. And I had 4 seniors in the group who none of whom were music majors, who we had our performance on Friday afternoon and we stayed that night and then came back the next day. They spent Friday night hanging out in the lobby of the hotel working on their theses for their majors, because they were all coming up, due that next week. And there was a good support structure built in that they all knew, okay, we're going to go do this fun thing, but then we also have to get to work. And so they wouldn't have even thought to not go on the trip. It's like the trip gave them that additional focus and that additional energy to move forward on this other thing that they were doing. So I think it's understandable and really common to have those worries and concerns that you might overcommit, but there's also this piece of the puzzle that students who are involved in the arts and in athletics, when they continue that, it helps far more than it ever gets in the way. And we're always looking out for them too. So I don't let my students in the ensemble ever use the ensemble as a reason to not do something else in another class. So it usually works out really well in the big picture.
Although one thing with athletics, though, is definitely at Willamette, you are very much a student first and an athlete second. And so if your student, your child thinks that they're going to be like a D1 football player, like at the University of Texas, where you kind of like marginally go to class, that will not work here. But our coaches are very understanding and sort of work as part of the team to help keep students on the straight and narrow.
So hopefully some of you have noticed that there have been some questions and answers going on in the Q&A. So there's some answers that have been posted as well. There's one outstanding about time management and sort of would we recommend anything, a specific tool for your student? And one thing I want to reassure you is that as part of the first year experience, a good chunk of time is actually given to talking to your students about time management, giving them different strategies. We have a really wonderful academic support team who can also help if a student is finding that it's just hard to make sense of things. So I think rather than suggest a specific tool, because of course there's just such a wide variety of things out there, I would just reassure you that we do have good supports for that on campus. And another concern that came up in one of the questions that I certainly want to address is, yes, we're talking about exploration and breadth, but as individual advisors, we do have the relationship with your student where, trust us, we know, like we will tell your student, it's time to get focused. It's time for you to really start to narrow down what it is that you would like to do while you're here. We are certainly invested in your students finishing on time. And we have a number of programs here at Willamette that are actually 3 years at the undergraduate college, and then you move on to one of the professional schools. So we're used to kind of making sure that your students are on track and really kind of keeping track of them in that regard. So I definitely want to reassure you in that respect. And as Daniel mentioned, there are some wonderful services at our Career Development Center that if your student is really feeling a little bit at sea, I love everything, that they're really great at helping to guide those decisions that students make in terms of focus. We are beginning to wrap up in terms of time. I think I'll maybe just see if there's anyone else in the group. Have we missed something? Does anyone want to add a final piece of advice relating to academic life at Willamette? Going once? Going twice?
Cecily, there's an open question that I don't super know the answer to about what kind of academic support athletes get. That I think it's basically the same as all other students, right? Or there's not athletic specific tutoring that I know of, at least in physics now.
Right. In athletics, this is, Daniel mentioned, the coaches are super supportive. So actually, it's not at all uncommon for discrete teams to kind of organize themselves together. So they will organize study sessions for the team, for example. I have found that the coaches are just super supportive of academic progress. For example, as faculty, we're asked to fill out a grade check twice a semester for athletes. So the coaches really are paying attention and they do a lot to support them academically. But there's also a lot available for the students within our academic support office as well. I'm going to take a minute and just pop up one final slide for you to look at that speaks to upcoming series, and to draw your attention in particular to the one on August 18th, Zoom into Success, actually discreetly addresses these questions of academic support. So we hope you're able to attend many of these, but if that's a topic that you're interested in, I will highly recommend it to you. Our student support team is absolutely fantastic. All right. Well, we are, I think, wrapping up on time here. So I would like to thank Paul. Paul, would you like to show yourself as the master behind all of this here? Thank you, Paul, for all of your help today. And also thanks to the panelists for taking time out of what is thankfully not an excruciatingly hot summer day here in Salem, Oregon. And thanks so much to all of you. It's so wonderful to have been able to talk to you and also to know that you're supporting your students so strongly. So we really look forward to seeing them and perhaps you as well in August when we get started for this fall semester. So thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.